So there we've got a first, second possible and a nice gap. Here we've got another sound, but nothing. This is insignificant, really. And then we've got an enormous one, really nothing. And then we've got two sounds, which could be a lub-dub together, or it could be a bundle branch block, with a split there and the same there. And then the small one, the second. This is an arrhythmia. Okay, you've got it all over the place. This is your typical one that needs the B4. Okay? So the B4 is the one that brings the rhythm back in, along with the B1. Now B1, you can start recording now. Yeah. So B1, its main function is to convert pyruvic acid in the cytoplasm of the cell into acetyl-CoA, which basically is the inside of the mitochondrial membrane. So that's where it works, B1. So basically what it does is it oxidizes pyruvate into acetyl-CoA, and to do that we need B1 and we need B2, B3 and B5, but our main thing is the B1 here. If we don't get the B1, we get a build-up of pyruvate, which then shunts to lactic acid, and I think it's the lactic acid which creates this. So you must test for Sam. If this is a B1, then test them for, particularly if they're blue, they'll have a high level of the D form of lactic acid. And that's the one that causes the aberration, I think, in the firing sequence. So it's all to do with electrics, and electrics are energy, and therefore it's the production of energy within the neurons. Okay, so what is the answer to this? I don't know. There's only one person who knows the answer to Sam's patient, and that's Sam's patient. Or in other words, the brain. If you ask them that consciously, they'll say, well, I don't know. So you've got to do a subconscious, if you like, non-verbal answer to that. So we feed the information in, we bypass this middle brain and the lower brain, because that's filtered all this information out, and we give it straight to the higher centers and ask the higher centers, what do you think about that noise that's coming out of your heart? And the brain says, well, it's a stress, it's not good. They go weak, and then you find out simple things that make it go strong again. So it's the same procedure for all the things, but if you then incorporate the eye positions, you can then say, there's a toxin. Like we did over here, we can say there's a toxin, and there's a nutrient, and she's hypoxic, So you find out the information. It's the same thing, however you start at the beginning. You start with the heart, or you start it with the AV node. That will be an interesting one, because this could be an SA node, and it could be an AV node. But there's an arrhythmia there, all right? So as Sam said, ablating it might bring it back in rhythm, but she won't have the vitality. And she could even have a pacemaker put in there, but it won't bring her back up, because she's missing probably the B1 and the B4, and along with the B1 and B4 in that particular group, as she's a blue one, comes B12 and also B5. So the B5 comes in because that helps her to make acetyl-CoA in the mitochondrial membrane, and the B12 is to get the oxygen in, because that's the pathway which converts pyruvate, and that's where you always get hypoxia. So let's have a look before we get into that of a few of the nutrients. So vitamin E, we've talked over the last few seminars here, is now known to embrace the tocopherols, but also the tocotrienol group, the xanthine group, the phospholipid group, and the lipoacetyls, or phytosterols, and the sex hormone precursors. The tocopherols appear to act purely as the antioxidants. So in other words, this is the protective part of the E complex, but not the whole picture. The whole picture only comes from the complete vitamin E. So it's a protective agent for more complex parts of the vitamin B assemblage. So in other words, if you gave alpha tocopherol only to a patient, it would have the protective part, but it wouldn't give all those other necessary parts of the vitamin E complex. Only that source coming from the natural grains will do that. In coronary thrombosis, the G complex, that's the vitamin B2 and 3, is far more important than the tocopherol. The effect is immediate. Since the G complex and the E complex are all found in wheat germ, the part of the wheat discarded in white flour making, the effect of the G complex is to promote better coronary circulation. So if you show to the B2, B3, in other words, green people, as we'll see, this is really important to us to keep our blood vessels open. So the white flour here is probably better than stale wholemeal, but it's not going to supply you any of the Bs or the Es, or of course the B4. So You're familiar with the bran is the outer part which contains the bees, and the purpose of the bran is not to contain the bees. The purpose of the bran is to seal the grain. Okay, the grain is the seed for the next plant. Okay? It's not just for bread making, it's actually the seed, that's what they use to sow. But it's not the bran, it's the germ. The germ is the seed. The germ is what contains all the nutrients, all the enzymes for the new plant in embryological form. And it's the part which is richest in the oils. And those oils are the whole vitamin E complex. The bran contains the bees, but the bran is a sealer. And that's why they can get the whole grain from the pyramid, and it's as fresh as it went into the pyramid, because it's sealed. Okay, and that's all it is. It's like a preserver, like putting it into a polythene bag and then vacuum extracting it. So there's still only one natural source to get good natural vitamin E, and that's fresh wheat germ oil. Way above anything else, way above. Okay. So remember, we looked at other ones in the list, and they were way down, particularly soy and other food compounds. Rice was second, but the only source of rice, whole grain rice bran, very difficult. If it's not organic, it's laced with arsenic, because they use a lot of arsenic in the pesticides. So good fresh wheat germ oil made from fresh wheat is the only way really to do it. Fresh butter contains only 10% as much vitamin E as wheat germ oil. So wheat germ oil remains the best, but it is very delicate. You need to keep it in the fridge, and you need to keep the top on. So when you use it and you do a squirt or 30, 40 drops, whatever, on your bread or on a spoon there, put the top back on as soon as you can and put it back in the fridge. Okay, that way you're going to stop too much air. You won't get the light because they're in mirror bottles anyway, but you won't have exposure to heat either because you keep it in the fridge. So look after it, and it'll look after you, and it will last for months. But if you leave it out in the kitchen with the top off, it'll go rancid like a wheat germ does. Okay, vitamin C. Now vitamin C, we hear an awful lot about vitamin C, and we hear an awful lot about ascorbic acid. But like vitamin E, ascorbic acid is only the protective part. So ascorbic acid we get from our diet goes on to make ascorbate sulfates, which are very important components in the cartilage of all our joints, in intervertebral discs, and in the skin. These are known as GAGs, or glucosaminoglycans. So ascorbate, vitamin C, is very, very important here in a lot of the ground matrix tissues in the body. Now, vitamin C is also an antioxidant. It becomes oxidized by reactive oxygen species and becomes dehydroascorbic acid, and then that is reduced by an enzyme called reductase, which is alpha-lipoic dependent. So this is another reason for alpha-lipoic, or putting alpha-lipoic into a vitamin C complex, because it helps to recycle the vitamin C. So you don't have to take so much. If you've got 10% alpha-lipoic, you don't need vast quantities, grams and grams of vitamin C. So active sulfate here, ascorbyl sulfate, needs the active form of sulfur, which is called PAPS, and that comes from the sulfur amino acid called cysteine. Now, vitamin C is the protective part, or antioxidant part is ascorbic acid, but the working part of vitamin C is the enzyme called tyrosinase, and this is an organic copper-bound enzyme. So this is where the body uses copper enormously. And it is rich in shiitake and reishi mushrooms, beetroot and potato juice. Now, I've talked about potato juice before, very rich source of tyrosinase and very rich source of protein. And that's where they extracted tyrosinase first of all and discovered it was a copper-dependent enzyme. And it was written by Fabio at Johns Hopkins University in 1932 that tyrosinase was recognized to be the active part of vitamin C. Vitamin C is not ascorbic acid. It's part of it. It's the protective part of the complex. Okay, vitamin P is now decided that it's part of the vitamin C. This is previously called, or now called, bioflavonoids. And the richest source of this, for this purpose, is from rutin and other citrus bioflavonoids. And the rich source of rutin is from buckwheat. So there's our friend. If you remember what buckwheat was rich in earlier, is magnesium. So now you've got it rich in magnesium and rich in rutin. So it's a good substance to use. Right, white cells contain the highest amount of vitamin C of any tissue in the body. Therefore, white cells are involved with the immune system, so they're probably quite important, therefore. It stimulates phagocytosis. It works with vitamin E to protect against free radicals. It works in the water-soluble components of the body, whereas vitamin E works in the fat-soluble. It's important in the synthesis of cortisol, hemoglobin, and it helps to metabolize histamine. So the richest is the lymphocytes, followed by the adrenals, followed by the eye. So why would it be in the eye? Because it acts as an antioxidant against lights in the water-soluble components in the vitreous and aqueous humor. It helps to protect against the oxidizing parts of the ultraviolet light. Gonads. So these are all the delicacies that you go for first of all when you have the animal there. You eat the eyes, the adrenals, the gonads, the pituitary, the brain, the liver, the spleen, and the pancreas. These are all the bits people don't eat anymore, or hardly eat, because they're not really very nice, and if they're not organic, you're not going to do them. But before the processing of food, people ate all the organs. They were the most important parts to the animal. The meat was a delicacy. You had a little bit of meat, but you had all your organs with it as well, the organ components. Now we have all the meat, and we discard that and give that to the dog or throw it away. And those are the best bits. So just an example where tyrosinase fits in. It converts phenylalanine to tyrosine and tyrosine to L-DOPA. So that's rather important because it goes on to make dopamine. But this pathway here of tyrosine to make L-DOPA, an alternative one, in the tissues more than in the nerves, this one is in the rest of the body, goes on to make DOPA here, which goes on to make melanin. And melanin is what gives our skin pigments and our hair pigments, and also protects the eye on the back of the eye. So we have different coloured melanin pigments which absorb red, green and blue lights. So these are called eumelanin and mixed type melanins and pheomelanins. So these all come from the amino acid tyrosine, and this is why some people said years ago, oh, if you take copper as a supplement, your hair goes back, it restores its colour. Now I haven't found that because I don't think ordinary copper does. It has to be in its organic form, bound form, to be able to make DOPA from that way. So taking it as mushrooms, and it has to be raw mushrooms, not cooked mushrooms, so you could juice mushrooms, juice potatoes, juice beetroot. These are the things that contain the organic copper. So deficiency of vitamin C reduces the capacity of the bloodstream to carry oxygen. It may drop 50%. So this is important for hypoxia. Hypoxia is a topic we're going to talk about at the ASK conference in June, and it's a really, really important one because you find this in 50-60% of your patients are hypoxic. In other words, they suffer from lack of oxygen. And when we're exercising, we probably suffer even more so from lack of oxygen. It primarily causes a degeneration of the intracellular substance of bone and teeth, and it causes fatigue. It's responsible for reduction in the germicidal enzymes in the saliva. All infections exhaust vitamin C. Hence, my good teeth equate with lack of infections. So SMART, as we call it, and I'll explain what a SMART product is in a moment. SMART vitamin C is ascorbic acid, 250 milligrams, which is recycled by 10% alpha lipoic acid, with organic reishi and shiitake mushrooms and beetroot, hesperidin and rutin. Hesperidin is a bioflavonoid from citrus, and rutin from buckwheat. Okay, so right at the beginning this morning, we talked about the finding that we've had over the last 4 months, and that is that people have fallen into categories as far as their nutritional requirement for their body types. So we said this morning that red people tend to have high homocysteine and ApoE4 expressions and have difficulty converting pyridoxine into pyridoxal 5-phosphate. Green people tend to have the tendency towards arteriosclerosis, intermittent claudication, angina. We tend to fur up, valvular stenosis, which again is furring up of the valves, and blue people tend to have the arrhythmias, what Sam was talking about with his patient there, and cardiac genetic defects, which is what we've been talking about all day. In other words, firing sequence problems, and valvular regurgitation. So these people need the B1s and B4s. These people here need the B2s and 3s to open up the blood vessels, and these people need the B6s to get the homocysteine level down. So that's the model. Okay. So let's have a look what a SMART product is and why we call it SMART product. So SMART products are a range of supplements that contain freeze-dried extracts of plants Freeze-dried means they're not heated. Enzymes generally are destroyed at 40 degrees or above. Enzymes are proteins. They're active substances which have receptor sites. They need to be protected. If they are heated above 40 degrees centigrade, they tend to be destroyed. Okay? So when you have a living plant tissue and you want to put it into a powder to take it, you need a freeze-dried product. Okay? So it's frozen dry, then the enzymes are intact. When natural sources of nutrients are added to synthetic compounds, they act as biological catalysts for the body to function most efficiently. Now, Jill always tells the story of the fish. Can I tell it again? Okay, at Imperial College in London, they had this, well, it wasn't an experiment, it was a finding that they had fish from the sea fish in a tank, and they had to keep these fish alive, they had to keep getting seawater, which was an expensive process. And one bright chemist in the department said, I can make you seawater exactly as it is, I got the formula here, and he made it. And lo and behold, all the fish died. Okay? So they went back to getting seawater again. And then another bright chemist, who obviously was a right brainer because he thought laterally there, he said, let's put the synthetic in, but let's put a sample of real seawater in there with it. And all the fish lived. Okay? So it's like a homeopathic, if you like, a small dose of the real thing catalyzed the synthetic to be able to work and got it to work. So the conclusion was there's things in seawater which we don't obviously know about, or energy patterns in there which allow the synthetic to come alive. And that's why we thought, let's try the same thing. So we tried it with certain minerals like zinc, magnesium, and found rich sources where it was present. So the first one was the copper. So organic copper is present in potatoes, mushrooms, and beetroot. Why? And the answer is why it's in there is because the plant uses it. It has enzymes that are copper dependent. So when they discovered what the enzymes were, they discovered it was tyrosinase. Okay? It's a rich source of vitamin C, the active part of vitamin C. So potatoes are a rich source of vitamin C, providing you don't cook them. That's the bad news. Okay? So if you juice them, you get everything out there. So that juice is really, really rich in tyrosinase. It's rich in protein. It's loaded with proteins in there. And it's got no starch because the starch is in your shredding machine. Okay? So the dry compound that you get out, what you've shredded off and filtered off, is your starch. The rest is pure protein and liquid. Okay? So it's very nutritious. But of course it's no good for greens, because us greens are no good with solanines, are we? And that's the fastest way to get solanines in is to drink potato water. So unless you can really be sure those potatoes are not got solanine, it's not a good way to do it. But mushrooms, crushed down and juiced, is very good. So, for instance, Szent-Gyorgy, who was the person who discovered vitamin C back in the 20s, studied a disease involving capillary fragility of the walls of blood vessels. He treated one group of laboratory animals with peppers, a natural food known to contain large amounts of vitamin C. The second group received synthetic vitamin C, i.e. ascorbic acid. So peppers of all forms are rich sources of vitamin C. The disease was cured only in the first group of animals who took the food extract. It has been suggested that natural vitamins contained in association with them with certain essential trace minerals, as well as enzymes and coenzymes that act as organic catalysts, without which they cannot produce their full vital effects. In each product, the natural source is from plants that contain the highest non-perishable form of the mineral. So, for instance, with zinc, the highest source of zinc is oysters. But I haven't been able to freeze dry oysters to put it into a capsule. We might have problems with allergies and all sorts of things. But the vegetable which is richest is celery. So much as you may hate celery, celery is actually a rich source of zinc. So what we do is we use the seed, which is the concentrated form of the plant before it grows, as our catalyst, as the source of zinc. And then we add into that zinc chloride and zinc sulfate, and we call that smart zinc. Now potassium, the natural highest source of potassium, is alfalfa, which they use as a cattle feed to increase their potassium level. But it's a wonderful way. Potassium is like a brake. It slows people down. It tends to alkalize people, and it lowers things like blood pressure. So it's a good thing to check. But the smart potassium works better than just pure potassium citrate or potassium chloride, etc. Magnesium, I talked about before, is in buckwheat. Copper would be your mushrooms, your shiitake and reishi. And calcium is arrowroot. Arrowroot is often used as an alternative to breast milk when the breast milk isn't being produced. So it's an alternative to cow's milk for people allergic to cow's milk and breast milk. Right, so let's just briefly look at the three body types as far as the nutrients. Okay, we talked earlier that red people have high homocysteine. So the red complex, the smart red complex, which is here, okay, is a capsule, multiple vitamin mineral. So this is specifically designed for red people. Okay. So it's researched and developed with red people with constitution. The clinical research has shown that red constituents require higher optimal levels of the Bs associated with homocysteine and strengthening collagen. So we know that here's our friend homocysteine, or enemy, and we've got to get that homocysteine down to cysteine. And to do that, this enzyme here, the synthase enzyme, requires B6, but it requires P5P and vitamin C. And you'll see here it's linked here, conjugated with serine, the amino acid. So serine is rich in beetroot. Okay. So hence the reason we put it in the base of beetroot. So beetroot acts as the catalyst for this whole formula. So red people should eat beetroot, but beware of not eating organic. If you eat, it's a root crop, it'll take up all sorts of toxins, beetroot, and you'll have all sorts of allergic reactions to beetroot if you don't use organic. If it's non-organic, you don't know what's in there because of the ground that it's been sown in before, the season of it. So we have to get enough B6 and vitamin C. If we have a high amount of homocysteine and we don't metabolize it, we need to recycle it, which will need B12 and folic acid to recycle, or in the liver we may need extra choline. So let's have a look. B6 as pyridoxal 5-phosphate supports the hormones, neurotransmitters, it regulates collagen and aids in the metabolism of homocysteine. Folic acid, if it's linked, coupled with zinc, is essential in all tissue repair and cellular regeneration. The zinc activates the folic acid to get it to work. So to get folic acid into making it into folinic and methylene and methyl tetrahydrofolates, the active forms, you need zinc. So simply putting folic acid and zinc together is really good on there. You could just use celery. I think, Wendy, you're using celery with one of your horses, aren't you? So celery is very appealing to a horse. So you get the folic acid and you get the zinc from there. Okay? So folic acid, and we found that folic acid is very rich in peppermint, not the aroma, the actual mint itself. So using mint is a fantastic source, natural source of folic acid. Vitamin C, we've talked about, is needed here. Vitamin B12 as methylcobalamin, the active coenzyme. Folic acid, as I said, with zinc to make methyl tetrahydrofolate. And riboflavin. Now riboflavin, or vitamin B2, previously known as vitamin G. G was stood for growth. So it used to be called originally growth. Vitamin G was growth. So vitamin B was always known as thiamine. Vitamin B2, before it became, was known as vitamin G. And vitamin B3, which the body can make, is known as nicotinic acid or niacin. Both are involved in the recycling of homocysteine and energy production, and are powerful vasodilators, which people with red predispositions need. Choline has a special role in the metabolism of high homocysteine via the liver to regenerate methyl groups, and with inositol it's a lipotrophic factor, so it helps to break triglycerides and cholesterol down, which is really important because they have this ApoE4 tendency to high levels. Now, of the minerals in there is iodine, and we know that iodine is very important for the thyroid hormones, the balancing of the estrogens, and the myeloperoxidase enzyme in the immune system. Magnesium, which cofactors 70% of all known enzymes in the body. Manganese, which is necessary for the production of collagen, acetylcholine and urea. Molybdenum, which converts sulfites to sulfates, which we saw important in the vitamin C. Selenium, which converts T4 to T3 and glutathione peroxidase. Silica is important for the ground matrix. So these people tend to get the arthritic problems. Reds are the ones, the reds, you see them, and you can detect them with their long fingers. Okay, when you got, have you red? Yes. Can you stick your fingers up? Okay, you've got usually got long, thin fingers, and that's you haven't got long, thin fingers, but you're red. How tall are you? How tall are you?
161.
Yeah, in English.
161.
161.
It's English.
Okay, all right. So usually between 5'5" and 5'7" for a female, 5'6", 5'8" probably for a male would be the red. Okay. Usually they've got long, thin fingers, and you see them often playing pianos. But doesn't necessarily mean all reds are musical. But they've got usually nice long fingers, and they're the long distance runners that you'll see in the marathon in April. Okay. So it's no good for a blue, really a green going in for the marathon. Marathon is for reds. Okay. They're the long, thin. They're the work on those long distances. They're long distance runners, not sprinters. So I always think about, this is one of the reasons, the silica, there's many reasons with the cartilage, but they do get prone towards arthritic problems, reds much more. Zinc is over 300 body enzymes, so this is everything from wound healing to repair of the tissues. Beetroot is rich in the amino acid serine and copper, and that's why we put all these together and we call it the smart red complex. So this is only for red people. Okay? So you don't give this to green people or to blue people, they have their own. So the formula is designed as a multiple for red people.